don't like thinking about a theoretical total time in cars stat. I was born and raised in Midwest America, and cars have been an essential part of my entire life. As a kid, they took me between the houses of my divorced parents, or to soccer practice, or to church, and, if we were good, McDonald's drive-thrus. As a teen, I got my license. I drove to and from school, or to my job as a busboy 1 day a week, and then to and from college. Cars were pretty much the only way to get anywhere. My dad's place is out in the countryside with nothing in walking distance except for my grandparents' house and a church. Upon returning home, this sort of conversation would happen where my dad would ask how the drive was, and I would say that it's boring, and then he would say, well, that's good. Boring is good. Most car rides were boring. I couldn't even read or play games as a passenger, or I'd get horribly carsick. As a driver, driving is just the means of reaching a destination. Aside from picking something to play over the speakers, my driving is standard and kind of expressionless. For the purpose of this video, I asked one of my friends what he thought of my driving. He called my driving fine, and that he had no complaints. I would never describe anything I've done with a car as beautiful. This dictated how I viewed cars for most of my life. As a kid, they were expensive and dangerous, but also kind of the only way to get around. Don't step in the road, and don't stand behind a car. Don't damage the car. The only time cars were fun were with miniature toys or attending demolition derbies at the local county fair and eventually sending virtual cars over ramps in Gran Theft Auto until they explode. Cars were either serious, boring, or games. Among those games that I actually enjoyed, there was Euro Truck Simulator 2, a game where basically nothing happens and you can even sleep in your cab. There was Driver San Francisco, a game where the main character can astrally project into any vehicle at any time. There are the sandbox games like the aforementioned Grand Theft Auto and even Crackdown, where the appeal is that you can drive any car, but you could also get out and engage in non-car oriented objectives. And then there were the arcadey games like Downhill Domination, ATV Off-Road Fury 2, or even stuff like Mario Kart and Road Rash 64. In addition to driving, you also do tricks or punch your competition. These games all offered something on top of just piloting a vehicle. Downhill Domination appeals to my desire to move fast and press a lot of buttons. Euro Truck appeals to my desire to always feel like I'm accomplishing something. But none of them really made me want to get into a car and drive fast, or watch the sort of people that could. As a kid, I was intimidated at the thought of learning to drive. It looked complicated, and I wished for a car that could be operated without pedals or a steering wheel, and instead had a little game controller behind the driver's seat. As a gamer kid, I just assumed that driving in the real world would be easier if it could be controlled like a video game. Over the past few years, I've now pivoted to thinking, I kinda wanna learn how to control a video game car with the same mechanisms as a real world car. I've been checking out some car-based media and reflecting on my limited view of vehicles. I'm still not tuning into any motorsport, but now I can stand on my tiptoes to peek into the until now out-of-reach perspective that can see driving as something more than just a means to a destination. Now, I can see that under the right circumstances, driving can be beautiful. Around 2018, I started reading Initial D and playing Forza Horizon 4. The former is a 700-chapter character-focused manga series about an unassuming high schooler discovering his love of racing by pushing his only car to surprising limits with natural talent and well-practiced intuition. It also had an anime that had a bunch of Eurobeat songs like Running in the 90s. I don't really have footage from this show, but I do have a lot of footage of the terrible game Initial D Mountain Vengeance. Let me tell you, that game does not run well on my computer. Or possibly any computer. To think you could find this game online for free. The latter is a game where the player drives a fantasy catalog of real-life modeled cars very fast, drifting through fields and knocking over weak terrain on purpose. These two would mark the beginning of my journey into a deeper understanding of cars and racing. Initial D follows Takumi Fujiwara, the son of a tofu shop owner in 90s Saitama, Japan. For years, he's been driving the family business's Toyota AE86 up and down the mountains to fulfill tofu deliveries. To ensure the delicate goods are delivered undisturbed, his dad would put a cup of water in the cup holder and instruct Takumi not to let any spill. As a teenager and after years of doing this, it's all a bit boring to him. At this point, he's familiar enough with the same mountain route that he can complete it at an incredible speed, just because he wants to get it over with. This is all, to him, regular driving. It isn't until he's pressured into a downhill race that he feels a thrill from behind the wheel. Some out-of-town competition absolutely dusts Saitama's best, and to defend their honor, Takumi shows up in his seemingly comparatively dumpy car and surprises all with a narrow victory. For the first time, he feels a calling. Meanwhile, Forza Horizon 4 is a game whose Wikipedia page mentions nothing about plot or story. I created a character that almost looked like me to be invited to a festival in fictional Great Britain. Hey wait, watch live on Mixer? Aww. Racers and seemingly enthusiastic personnel have been invited from all over to run tight races, pull off cool stunts, and create as many opportunities as possible to gush over how cool cars are.
I might have got a little carried away here, but I was sure you wouldn't mind.
As if the whole island is infested by ghosts of long-gone drivers still aching to hit that perfect drift, you're regularly reminded by various disembodied voices over the intercom that driving is, in fact, super cool.
Very good technically, but now let's see some passion. Come on.
This vibe is pretty well actualized in the structure of the game. The main events are races and scripted car missions, but between these, you're free to drive whichever cars you own around the map and discover little bursts of excitement along the way. Driving on every road, finding hidden cars, and smashing the 150 bonus billboards are all optional collectibles. Every off-mission drive comes with a Tony Hawk-style combo that builds with high speeds, drifts, near misses, and destroying small scenery, though some scenery a little bit bigger than you think it should be able to be destroyed by. And then only ending after a lull in the chaos or canceling after a big hit. Forza's Horizon series features a short rewind ability, affording players the opportunity to retry the previous 10-ish seconds with minor tweaks to braking or acceleration or the angle you're approaching at. This allows you to retry certain elements without having to restart the entire race to perfect a single lineup. It's a less serious counterpart to Forza's Motorsport series and allows me, someone who never cared for racing games more serious than Super Nintendo's Top Gear, to just have fun with cars. In a way, it was kind of like an old 3D collectathon. The actual goals and objectives are whatever, but a lot of the fun came from exploring the map and enjoying the movement. Instead of cartoony characters and environments and music, you have real cars, licensed music, and a photorealistic setting. Though the people you meet may as well be cartoons given the goofy scenario and outlandish scripted excitement.
Let's see some passion.
I'll get back to that. Initial D is somewhat similar. The cars are real, the locations are probably real, right? The characters in the story are fictional, but they're also grounded, believable. Takumi's a kid with an unassuming car, but is able to accomplish record times and impress the more experienced and better equipped competition. The crowd, the other drivers, and the readers are clueless at what exactly separates him from the rest. Within the competition is a friendly rival possessing a genius racer brain and an eye for detail. He fills in the much-needed gaps for the in-universe characters and us, the readers. Takumi, who's just doing what he's been doing for the past 5 years, is intimately familiar with his car and the track. Their out-of-town experience and ability is only even with his cup-of-water-style training. He knows exactly when to break into and accelerate out of each turn to keep his unassuming 86 within inches of his powerful competition. It's only in the final moments of the race that Takumi is able to overtake his opponent on a turn he appeared to be going way too fast to complete. By placing the front inner wheel inside the street-side gutter, he was able to keep his speed while maintaining the traction needed to continue turning. Nobody would have decided to do that on a whim, and it's due to his familiarity, natural skill, and history of experimentation that allows Takumi to upset the competition and win the respect of everyone. I, on the other hand, was just beginning to grasp the basics of racing, taking notes like, don't ever use the handbrake, and start turns from the outside before getting on the inside. I never really felt like I knew what to pay attention to outside of just steering and accelerating, but I was also too nervous to adjust to any of the dozens of difficulty options. I don't like losing, but I also get frustrated if I can't tell what I'm doing wrong. I ended up relying on the novice difficulty and rewinds just so I could celebrate some unearned victories. Forza Horizon 4's progression also wasn't really straightforward. There are a bunch of standard races, but there are also more scripted events where people want to see you do something crazy in a car. Jump over a train, or chauffeur people, crazy taxi style, with a limousine, in the snow. All of these events have such over-the-top dialogue spoken to a protagonist that says nothing, but expresses such impossible excitement in robotic eyes. It's so crazy. There's just so many shots of somebody talking to your guy, but they're always facing away from the camera. The only person that ever faces you is the person that you made, who never speaks, and is always just kind of happy to be there. As a person that both knew nothing about and contained no natural talent for driving, it was never not weird to hear the manufactured enthusiasm.
I want them all talking about us. I want the punters to know that when we say world's fastest, we mean it.
It was consistently written as high-profile, genuine excitement that it began to feel like a weird prank on me, the one playing the game. Meanwhile, Takemi's starting to feel an excitement for what had always been mundane driving. Something that he had gotten bored with, something he didn't understand, has finally begun to make a little more sense to him. It became the thing he wanted to pursue and eventually master. He wanted to know what he was capable of behind the wheel. Spanning across a dizzying 719 chapters, Initial D is split into 2 parts. Part 1 spans about 200 chapters and explores Takemi's introduction to the sport, the things he knows, and the things he needs others to show him. It ends shortly after graduation, where he's invited by those first competitors to create an elite racing team to challenge top racers from all the other prefectures. He found something he loves, and he wants to devote this part of his life to achieving something great. Part 2 is the other 500 chapters. Presumably, it follows the rest of his journey, meeting new and interesting characters while racing on exciting and treacherous routes. I only read about 30 chapters before being forever distracted by, some rom-com slice of life trash. As for Forza Horizon 4, I participated in most of the events and races, or at least as many as I found. I got over level 100, not that that means anything. I never cared to join in on online races, and eventually just put the game down once I felt like I had done everything. There are hundreds of different cars in that game, but there were none that I personally wanted to obtain. It didn't really help that a lot of the cars, clothing, or any other customizable options were obtained at random through an in-game wheel spin. Apparently you can even get the 86 from Initial D, but I never figured out how to buy it, or maybe it was just obtained from luck. But even if I did, obtaining specific things was never really a motivating factor to begin with. The fun that I had was just finding things on the map and building combos on the way to the next thing. It was never about the cars. I just enjoyed going fast and avoiding other cars, or doing impossible drifts and knocking over fences and just comically weak trees. There's probably a lot I missed in that game, but I had fun with my limited scope in the same way that I pleasantly listened only to the classical radio station and failed to discover another station included a remix of The Killer's The Man. That's a song that's perfect for that game. It is just as equally and impossibly earnest as all of Forza Horizon 4's dialogue and characters, and I also can't tell if it's supposed to be a joke. Both Forza Horizon 4 and Initial D showcase how cool cars can be, but the former felt very surface level to me. NPCs will talk about cool car techniques all while I artlessly and easily drift for the purpose of obtaining imaginary points. Nothing felt difficult, which meant I was never going to be as impressed as any of the characters in the game, nor would I really be appreciating what I'm doing or seeing. Of course, part of that's my fault for not changing the difficulty, but at the same time, it wasn't really part of the game to teach me how specifically I should be driving to handle these new techniques. It was more in the game's interest to just kind of assume that everybody knows cars are really cool and need no introduction or explanation. There's no growth or really any learning in Forza Horizon 4. You're assumed to just be the best, and everyone knows that. This is all contrary to Initial D. You see the perspective and the thoughts of people that try their best and still lose. They're impressed and humbled by seeing the things they can't do. In each race, somebody learns something that they lacked before. They understand just a little more of this complex hobby they're engaging in, and it becomes a little clearer just how much more they have to learn. It was after my time with these two that I found myself opening up to more car stuff. After dipping my toes into the shallow end of the pool of racing physics, I found myself wondering how far this interest can go. Will I be a guy that plays driving simulators? Will I have a favorite F1 driver? Even if I wanted to be the kind of person that enjoys those, how would I even get there? During the pandemic, I got really hooked on speedruns of the Grand Theft Auto games. It was mostly Vice City and San Andreas, but I watched a lot of streams and recorded speedrunning marathon event runs while I was working from home. I love the idea of these main characters rushing through every drive and conversation because they're in a really big hurry. I like time trials, and I played these games a lot as a kid. I even began speedrunning Vice City myself. Which is kind of like a racing game. You spend a lot of time driving vehicles really fast and memorizing routes and striving for better personal times instead of directly beating somebody. Maybe that's just how I see it at my skill level. I started watching Joshimuz, a figurehead of the community, instrumental in popularizing the San Andreas speedrun in the early 2010s. He still runs SA to this day, and even just ran it at this year's Summer Games Done Quick, a marathon charity event showcasing speedruns. San Andreas still gets the most engagement from his audience, but he occasionally checks out other stuff like modern motorsport game iRacing. It's the type of serious simulator where you sign up for hour-long races on recreations of real-world circuits with 30 other players, and he'd play it with a wheel, pedals, and a VR headset. Participants are rated on both placements and a safety stat, which decreases when you go off track or into another car. It makes sense in a game where one stray hit can force a dozen other cars into pit requiring repairs. You have to be intimately aware of yourself among others, all while cruising at like 250 kilometers an hour.
There's an incident in La Source.
Really?
Like Poole and Martin.
My car's fucked.
Initially, I, like most of his audience, was not really interested in these streams. It was kind of like when I was a kid, I was disappointed when a notable sporting event interrupted my regularly scheduled local network trash. Oh, there's a NASCAR event going on? Oh, the Anaheim Angels in the World Series take precedence over that 70s show? I guess I'll go outside. It was only in watching the entirety of some of Josh's races that I began to feel the excitement myself. I've often heard, and likely repeated myself, that yeah, I get that NASCAR is immensely taxing for the drivers, but it doesn't translate that intensity to me as a viewer. It was actually hearing his train of thought while seeing it all in first person that built a bridge from fast car to personal neuron activation.
I can't.
What are you doing?
I got a flag at the top left, and I can't look at it because I'm fucking concentrating, and I just thought it was the end.
I'd see the same turn 20 times and recognize each attempt as slightly different. I learned about the importance of a spotter, which he had voiced with some sort of in-game automation.
Car right. Still there. Clear right.
It would discuss how much gas he has left, how long it will take him, the distance between cars ahead or behind him, and presence of cars in his immediate proximity. Occasionally, it would say something that's 100% correct and also unintentionally really funny.
The car in front of us is now gay.
He'd spin out or get spun out and talk through what happened and if it could have been avoided. I slowly began to understand what I would need to do and think about if I were to try racing like that myself.
I feel like I just plow into this guy. Yeah, I should have gone left and taken the massive slowdown.
I saw hundreds of tiny failures and I understood how easy it was to do poorly. In a good race, I saw everything that had to go right, all the concentration, the awareness, and ability. It looked incredible. A couple times I heard him say, "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." Sure, any race can be reduced to an hour of cars going in a circle, but when you know what the players are thinking, it's a lot easier to relate to. It would be reductive to say that soccer or volleyball is just a bunch of people pitting something back and forth. Blue Lock and Haikyuu help illustrate the depth of both of those sports, and that's what Initial D did, right? Now I can visualize those precise racing lines. I anticipate the timing of braking or gear shifts, the spotter announcing when cars are within your immediate vicinity, overtakes. Knowing that a momentary lapse in judgment can ruin an entire hour of your selected entertainment, and maybe even the hours of others, there's a lot on the line.
Fuck's sake! Fuck's sake!
Car right. Clear right.
This happened in literally the first minute of an hour-long race. I doubt I'll ever take this seriously enough to get a headset and a racing wheel. I would need to know I love it before dropping enough money on the hardware required for something that I don't even really have the space for. On top of that, iRacing itself is pretty pricey. Sure, it's only $10 on Steam, but access to specific cars and tracks can run $10 to $15 each. It kind of sounds like a lot, but I've actually spent that much on a single genre of game that simulates a real-world activity. I have spent hundreds of dollars on equipment and individual songs to play in Rock Band. I've spent hundreds of hours striving for perfection while doing the same things over and over. After breaking a bunch of the standard plastic drum sets, I got an electronic drum kit of my own that could be played outside of video games. It allowed for way better precision, but also increased the skill ceiling of what I thought I could become. As I played along virtually in my house, I got a closer idea of what that drummer had to do to perform their songs. This silly video game knowledge came with a greater appreciation of the recordings. I respect taking a hobby that seriously, but I also just don't play that many competitive multiplayer games anymore. The thought of battling against a similarly skilled opponent, staying within seconds of them for tens of minutes at a time, delights my imagination. I don't get this excitement from even the most intense game I play, Rainbow Six Siege. Firefights are over in seconds and all my tension is released. I've played that game for hundreds of hours and I'm just awful. Terrible. To enjoy sim racing at this level, I would need to take it seriously. I'd be investing money and time to practice, all for something that always has the risk of just not being fun. And I need to be okay with that. Accept it all as part of the journey. You can race perfectly and still drop rank just because one other person wasn't focusing enough right around you.
Are you fucking serious?
It would be like performing a concert live with like 30 other people. You all practiced individually, but if you throw everyone else off, expect some choice words for ruining it for everybody.
Again.
Absolute buffoon.
Oh, hello, he's raging more.
Absolute buffoon. You're being reported, by the way, Joshua.
And that makes sense. Driving in real life is a strangely communal experience. Everyone is isolated in their own car, but generally moving towards a common objective. Share the road, follow the rules to get to your destination, and don't cause any trouble. Some rules, like merging and overtaking and right-of-way, they have some guidelines, but they generally operate on vibes alone. You gotta know when you can do it and when you can't, or you're going to ruin somebody's day. I've still never experienced a full race of any kind of motorsport. That being said, watching a charismatic and skilled personality talk through simulated races has brought me closer to a future where I do. These events that were once, to me, kind of boring wastes of time are now accessible and are probably tense and exciting. Before these streams, motorsport was something that had no appeal to me. It was like looking at an art piece of which I could extrapolate no meaning, or enduring an impenetrable album of noise rock. It wasn't until sitting through these streams, seeing the performances as they're made, and directing my focus to the human elements that it becomes approachable. I appreciate the construction of the art piece. Something loud and repetitive now becomes bizarrely catchy. Those aspects have always been there, but I just couldn't see it. Now that I can give it some meaning, I'm interested in seeing more.
What a clean race
Nice
from
one,
me.
Josh.
Well, okay,
Great
Millie.
drive. That's a podium.
Thank you, Jim.
I picked up Art of Rally on a whim sometime in February 2021. I can't remember how I discovered it, but I was drawn in by its sleek presentation and confidence, delivering a pure driving experience that's both cartoonish and a little realistic. For me, the driving was difficult, but the structure of the game was forgiving and kind of introspective. For the first time, I wasn't just focused on my placement. I wanted to be a better driver. Art of Rally is a game with the goal of helping people understand what this sport means to those in its community. It's right there in the name. It's here to invite the player to see and to even perform the thing that makes the rallying motorsport beautiful. Each group spans a few years and provides you with a selection of era-appropriate car imitations and a brief blurb of that period's scope of the sport. For example, in 1967, the first scenario of the game, popularity was gaining and manufacturers were using rallies as means of showing off their products. As it says right here. At this point chronologically, the cars are all the weakest and exclusively rear-wheel drive. I didn't really know how to control this kind of vehicle, and as such, my first races felt like steering a very heavy shopping cart at the longest, twistiest aisle of the grocery store. While the game is entirely about races, you never actually compete side by side with another car. You race alone, and upon completion, your course times are compared to the simulated times of your competition. It hides away any objective assessment of your performance until you're done. You won't know how well you're doing until you see the leaderboard. In the moment, there is nobody to compare yourself against. During my first few hours with Art of Rally, I was just not a skilled driver. I wasn't confident in how my inputs directed my car, and I always had to focus directly on my current position and angle instead of preparing for upcoming obstacles. Every mistake off track respawns you with a 5-second penalty, and every mistake into a wall or obstacle feels like it spins your car out at least 150 degrees. It was difficult, but it forced me to find comfort in playing slower. When you're learning, it's always worth it to go slow than to incur another high-speed mistake and not learn anything. After all, slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. Because there's no visible competition, it was tempting to restart after any sort of spin-out or off-track mistake, but the game limits the amount of resets you have per season. You're encouraged to play through the races in their entirety and not worry about obtaining perfection, because it's more important that you're getting experience, recovering from failure, and seeing things to their end. It was strictly up to me to assess my own performance during each race, but that helped me appreciate my progression as I improved. I really like this whole arrangement. I became more invested in completing races and ready to accept the mistakes as they come. Because I couldn't see any competition, I would be surprised at my own placements against my novice difficulty opponents. I was really just learning how to handle these cars for the first time, so I liked that the game took away the things with which I would compare and discourage myself against. The races felt personal, and I became aware of whether I was avoiding previous mistakes on my own. Because Art of Rally is a no-frills racing game, my motivation was never increasing any kind of trick score or even strictly getting a better time. It was just getting a better control of my vehicle. As I progressed through the groups of the game's campaign, I began driving more powerful and eventually all-wheel drive vehicles. I found myself capable of controlling cars with faster acceleration, faster turns, and tighter braking. It was like learning with training weights to best prepare me to enjoy the most capable rally cars. It was similar to how I learned how to drive in my dad's big, unwieldy manual transmission Ford F-150, so that I could really appreciate every automatic sedan I'd drive afterwards. This type of progression might be standard in a lot of car games, but none until Art of Rally were able to make me care enough to see what they had to offer. I can't even say where this game lies on the arcade to simulation racing game spectrum. Is it in the middle, a little closer to arcadey? All I know is that the cars have a strong sense of weight, it's easy to mess up, and nasty collisions will mess up specific parts of your car, making it handle differently. By the time I was comfortable controlling the cars of this game, I was excited to look ahead down the road and see a mile of switchbacks. Each one would be an opportunity to perform a beautiful, momentum-maximizing turn. A handful of tiny considerations would need to be understood for one perfect 2-second element. It felt like nailing a drum fill or correctly playing a riff on a guitar. Going by the statistics of my Steam achievements, I started the game up on the afternoon of Saturday, the 13th, 2021. 1 week later, I had completed every stage in every season of the game. I mean, it was only on novice difficulty, but I still continued to play it afterwards and try and get better. I wanted to know how good I could get, but that ended up somewhere around skilled. It was after spending a total 45-ish hours with Art of Rally, in addition to my recent enjoyment of other car stuff, I finally found myself ready to take on a high-profile racing game kinda seriously. Gran Turismo 4 is the 2004 release of Polyphony Digital's 7-game series. I booted the game up for the first time on April 2nd, 2023, and at the time of writing, I've put in about as many hours as I did with Art of Rally, yet my completion percentage is much closer to the progress I made through the initial D manga. With this entry, the series adopted the subtitle, The Real Driving Simulator. The Gran Turismo series has always stood out as realistic simulation over other contemporary car games, and this fourth entry would offer even more mathematical physics. Now, hundreds of licensed real-world vehicles have their weight distribution simulated, allowing anyone to harmlessly and costlessly take a mid-sized sedan directly into a wall. It even allows for control schemes more advanced than other PS2 driving games. You can use a wheel controller, but if you don't have one, you're offered the next best option: pressure-sensitive buttons. Did you know that was a thing for PlayStation 2 controllers? By pressure sensitive, I mean the harder you press a button, the more it's registered as being pressed. Which means if you want your car to drive the fastest, you have to really press that X button as much as it can be pressed for minutes at a time. I tried that for a little bit because it was kind of cool, but after an hour, all of my fingers started to hurt. Fortunately, acceleration and braking is also mapped to the right analog stick, which works fantastically. I think all the focus on realism is what leads me to say that, more so than any other game, Gran Turismo 4 reminded me of actual car-related events that happen in my life. You have to take tests for certain licenses, shop around for suitable cars, and even get oil changes. You can upgrade dozens of different car parts, and just like in real life, I have no idea what most of them do. The game also offers a B-spec mode where you don't even drive and instead take the role of a crew chief instructing a driver of one of the cars you purchased. You could tell them when to be aggressive or when to pit or when to play it safe. This idea has been tackled in greater depth in 2016's Motorsport Manager and 2022's F1 Manager 22, which I've seen a bit of gameplay for, but since I never checked out this mode, I really don't have anything to say on it. Your cars will never really sustain damage. You don't need to purchase insurance, and my license reads Jerry instead of Calvin, but it's still more relatable than getting shoved into a car and being heralded as the next best racer. You define your career, and you work on your abilities with pointed drills. My in-game career was a unique and personal experience. As I mentioned, Gran Turismo contains licenses which dictate which races you can participate in. In order to obtain these licenses, you have to pass a series of tests, small individual drills focused on building proficiency one concept at a time. These are, in a sense, just a really engaging and rewarding set of tutorials. The first drill is accelerating and braking to a stop for 100 meters in a straight line with a car that could have been pulled straight out of a school parking lot. Finish in 11.3 seconds to pass, finish in 10.15 seconds for a gold medal. The next test is 200 meters in a faster car, finish in 11 seconds for a gold. The tests continue building in complexity while varying in locations in cars until you're practicing overtakes and high-speed cornering in supercars. Let's take a look at some of the drills. At the beginning of each test, there's a brief write-up of what you should be thinking about. What's the write-up for that second test? What could they say about braking in 200 meters? Use the braking point from the previous test as a guide and make the necessary adjustments. A License A test? The first section consists of S's. They're not only blind, they're canted. I don't completely know what that means, but maybe that's why I only got a bronze on it. Next license. At the top of this hill is the apex of a corner, so you'll need to start braking as soon as you're climbing and head for the curbing on the right side. Next license. It's an incredibly long course with one lap measuring about 12 miles. There are more than 170 corners here, so don't try and set a blistering time right away. These are all significant. It will always be important to know how long it takes for your current car to brake. You'll need to remember specific parts of tracks and use the signs as references. There are so many different types of corners and corner sequences that all require their own instruction. The scoring of these tests is also kind of remarkable. The window from bronze to silver is about twice as wide as the window from silver to gold. As I progressed, I felt that I was usually able to get bronze if I didn't make any big obvious mistakes. Silver always felt attainable, but required careful understanding of what was being asked of me. Gold, well, I got 6 early on, and I'm happy with that. The tests are unlocked sequentially, and upon completion, you're rewarded with a car, which I immediately sold to afford a second-hand car that I actually wanted. Let's compare this against my real-world driving school. I attended driving school the summer I turned 16. I did it so I could get my driver's license before I was 18. I attended what I think was 24 hours of in-person classes over 4 weeks, and was to drive 8 hours with an instructor, in addition to 50 with a guardian. I attended the classes, and there we watched tapes about turning on a busy street or the dangers of driving under the influence. I remember we saw a video starring a fictional safety superhero, Buckleman.
You buckle up.
Who are you?
I'm Buckleman.
I paid for my sessions with my own $300. The classes ended with a written test in which the instructor walked out of the room while all the students just kind of shared the answers. In my first session with an instructor, I took a 90-degree turn from one country road to another at 25 miles an hour. I think I only actually drove like a few hours before that in my dad's aforementioned manual transmission Ford F-150. I remember being told a story afterwards from a friend who had a session with that driver in that same car a few months after I did. He told me that when he got home and opened the driver's side door to get out, it just fell off. The instructor, I guess, just held it on as he drove home. I don't know. I would only drive a few more hours with my dad before wrapping up the final required session 6 months later. We went over maneuverability, Ohio's required test that simulates parallel parking, in an early 2000s Chevy Cavalier. This car does not appear in Gran Turismo 4. I was taught to rely on references that only make sense if I'm driving that exact car. We then drove for 2 hours. Over those, the instructor would then fall asleep to a station of Christmas music before arriving at our final stop well ahead of when we were supposed to. That driving school no longer exists. It has been replaced by a salon for dogs. I ended up practicing maneuverability again on my own on my grandparents' 2008 Toyota Camry. This model of car, regardless of year, is also not present in Gran Turismo 4. I ended up passing my driver's test on my very first attempt with only one negative mark. I took a right turn from a stop sign too slowly. Within 10 days of receiving my driver's license, I would then go on to total my 96 Chevy S10, a truck that also does not appear in Gran Turismo 4. More care is put into learning how to drive a virtual car than a real-life car. I mean, sure, I'm not exactly going to race that 2008 Camry, and learning and driving real-life cars under regular traffic rules isn't exactly fun, but was I taught well enough? Can somebody be taught well enough for a lifetime of driving? It's interesting to me looking at this familiar structure that exists both in the game and in real life, but they just lead to wildly different objectives and speaks to the wide definition of what it means to know how to drive. Once I got my B license in-game, I was then given the option to buy and upgrade whichever car I found fit. Since a lot of races are locked behind specific categories of cars, any given career will require experimentation with different vehicles and different setups. Since I wanted to reinforce my affinity with my real-life car, a 2014 Subaru Legacy, my first in-game purchase was a 98 Subaru Legacy. It's basically the same thing as that time that I modeled my XCOM squad after my actual real-life friends. I was only able to take it on a handful of the initially available races, and even some of those I was too underskilled or under-equipped to actually compete in. But it was fine. I was happy to get a vehicle and just try it out. From browsing to purchase to driving it on my own terms, it took like a minute. To buy my actual used 2014 Subaru Legacy, it took days of worry, hours of in-person discussion, and 2 long and emotional phone calls. In early 2017, I was strongly advised to invest in a newer car. I had then been driving a 98 Toyota Camry for 4 years. I loved that car, mostly because it wasn't the 2002 Mercury Villager I had been driving previously. The same minivan of my childhood that does not appear in Gran Turismo 4. I purchased it after a friend of a friend had gotten into an accident that rendered it perfectly drivable but technically totaled. It had probably 180,000 miles and the trunk was duct taped shut, but for $800 it was small, cozy, and had air conditioning. And I could afford it all on my own. I had no idea what I was looking for as my first big adult purchase. I just wanted some reliable 4-door, and since I didn't know which questions to ask for making this decision, I wanted to avoid thinking as much as possible. That same buddy from before helped me locate a used 2014 Legacy, just as he had with the 98 Camry. After arriving at the dealership together, we entered a 3-hour process of test driving, asking questions, being asked questions, and waiting around. We definitely didn't understand the game that we were supposed to be playing with these salesmen. How do you haggle? What's acceptable? How much is this guy reveling in the fact that he's selling to 2 guys in their early 20s that don't really know what they're doing? I was buying a car that I might use for 10 years, and that guy might have sold 10 cars that week alone. I had to call people just to make sure I wasn't making some sort of mistake that I didn't even think of. In the end, we didn't haggle, and I made payments on a sticker price purchase monthly over the next 5 years. My car has been paid off for a while now, and it successfully made the drive from Ohio to Oregon. To top it off, it's currently in the shop for its regular 90,000-mile service. After purchasing my in-game 98 Subaru Legacy in 5 button presses, I then got a needed oil change within 5 more button presses. Maintenance complete, optional upgrades are now the only reason I will be spending money on this car. If I were to sell it, it would only take a few more button presses. Part of Gran Turismo is upgrading the cars that you have so you can perform better with something that you're already familiar with. Some changes are pretty obvious. An upgraded engine increases your acceleration and top speed, or reducing weight grants faster braking and acceleration. No point in not getting these upgrades if you can afford them. Then there are the more complicated and less obvious upgrades. There are like a dozen different tires you can pick from, and while it's clear when you choose snow or dirt, it was only thanks to watching Joshimuz's iRacing and eventually his F1 Manager streams that I knew the difference between hard and soft. The hotter the tires, the stickier they are against the track, allowing for better grip and tighter turns. Hard tires take longer to heat up, but also take a lot longer to wear out. If you don't have to use the pits, go for the soft tires. Then there's suspension and drivetrain. I honestly have no idea what these do. Some of them allow for full customizability that would affect how gear changes happen, and the thought of changing anything here makes me feel like I'm just likely to mess it all up. It's like a sandwich store that offers all sorts of presets, but also offers a build-your-own sandwich type. I might just pick whatever sounds good to me, but it might make zero sense altogether, just resulting in a disappointing, but functioning meal. I should have just followed the preset. All of these combined make difficulty and progression a little bit confusing. Every race is worth a number of A-spec points, which is determined from your car's abilities based on whatever the AI is going to have. If your car's stats outclass the competition, races will award 12 or 8 or a lot of times just 1 A-spec point. A 44-point race for me is tricky but doable if I really nail my corners and overtake smartly, but a 100-plus point race might as well just be impossible. This also varies because there's no way for the game to know how familiar I am with the car that I'm driving. In order to enter an American race, I needed an American car. I bought the most expensive car I could, a 2005 Ford GT, and upgraded basically everything. I started the race and was presented with a 144 A-spec race. Then there are driving missions, which are kind of like the license test, but more specific. They reward a ton of A-spec points, but that could be for doing something as simple as overtaking a slow vehicle on a curve while driving that identical slow vehicle. And it takes 30 seconds. Since I often don't know the level of competition until the race starts, I saw a good handful of races way outside my skill level, a few races that were completely impossible for my owned cars, and countless one-point races where I win without even really trying. I still enjoy these because I'm enjoying getting used to driving the cars that I own, but I'm certainly less engaged when I can mess up 4 turns and still somehow be 20 seconds ahead of second place. On top of all of that, the A-spec point totals can be unreliable indicators of difficulty. I can start the same race with the same car and face different opponents that equate to a wildly different rating. And those different ratings can still sometimes just be impossible. Okay, this 5-point race seems doable, and I finish well ahead of the cars behind me, but I'm also 27 seconds behind the car that finished first. I make no mistake about my unfamiliarity with cars and driving, but I'm also miserable at exploration and hate the feeling that I'm going in the wrong direction. I get that you're supposed to just try stuff out and hang out with the cars that the game has to offer, but when I found myself unsure about what my next objective is or what I personally want to accomplish, or worst, when I can't tell if I'm just not skilled enough for the challenge or if I actually don't have the right tools for the problem, that's when I start to lose interest. I'm not really sure if I'm doing the right thing, and I don't even want to try to get better. And that's a shame because I was getting better. I'm now confident driving with manual transmission after learning it helps limit your speed on turns. The game even tells you which gear to use. I silvered that 1-lap Nürburgring license test. When I finished that, I erupted out of my chair with celebration, alone in my apartment. I gotta respect the degree of customization and detail that the game makes available to all its players, but I'm also left wondering, do most players know how they want to set up their cars, or are they, like me, just guessing? What's the average level of completion for this game? The audience must have a base familiarity with vehicles, but even just thinking of the North American audience could be anything. And this is a Japanese-made game. That place has incredible public transportation. What's the vehicle literacy like there? How much did the audience know beforehand, or did they learn it all in the game? Gran Turismo 3 and 4 were the second and third highest selling PS2 games of all time, which blows my mind. Does everybody just want to drive virtual cars? Is it because so many people have already inherited the societal importance of owning a car that we all just want the opportunity to own one irresponsibly? The number 1 and number 4 highest selling games are Grand Theft Auto San Andreas and Vice City, respectively. 2 games that belong to a series that allow its players to steal and crash cars for no real reason except that it's kind of fun. I, at 28, was only interested in Gran Turismo 4 after spending dozens of hours playing and watching other things that would ease me into it. I won't be obtaining 100% game completion anytime. I probably won't even reach 50%, but I still had a lot of fun with my time spent driving and checking out the offerings in the tree of locations and shops and menus and sub-menus. I certainly feel like I understand the fundamentals of driving more so than before having played Gran Turismo 4. But fundamentals are one thing. Do I understand what could make driving artistic or when driving is beautiful? For a few years, I had to drive through construction and rush hour every day for my job. Sometimes I had to slap myself in the face just to stay awake. I've never expressed anything with my driving. I haven't even put any bumper stickers on my car. I've wondered how people can be so engaged in something I feel forced to do and actively avoid thinking about. There's beauty and emotion in a really good driving performance. People will be at the edge of their seats watching a formula race, and people will celebrate a victory or feel disappointment in a poor performance. During the editing of this video, I happened upon a commercial by Hankook Tires partnering with a Formula division. In it, they literally say, driving emotion. I got Hankook Tires for my 98 Toyota Camry. The only emotion I felt was ease that somebody trustworthy directed me towards a reliable set of tires that I would be paying hundreds of dollars for. The biggest difference I see between driving and, say, playing a musical instrument is their purpose. There's not really a practical use for a guitar, right? It exists to be played. It exists to make music. That's not the same for a car. A lot of people, at least in the United States, need a car to get by in their environment. Yeah, I mean, there are situations like working from home or living in a walkable area or even nearby public transit that lessens its need, but for a lot of people, they're expected to have a car or, at the very least, be able to drive. Nobody's really expected to learn how to play an instrument in high school, and no interview asks if the applicant has a reliable form of music making. When I drive my car, I'm not making art. I'm just getting to my destination as fast as I can without making a mess. I own a car that I'm actively trying not to use. I also own a guitar that I'm trying to play every day to get better. I want to make something beautiful with a guitar, and I want to make nothing with my car. I am more confident now in understanding my car's needs and being responsible about it, but that came after years of being an uncertain car owner. I didn't know what I should be paying attention to or what could be an issue, and anything could require a payment that I wasn't prepared for. A check engine light would spark weeks or months of anxiety before just going ahead and scheduling the appointment to get it looked at. How do I know the mechanic is trustworthy? How do I know the car dealership and the salesperson were trustworthy? How do I know if the car I purchased was the right choice? I'm going to be with this thing for years. How can I avoid buyer's remorse? My 2014 Subaru Legacy burns oil, and I need to check it regularly to make sure it's still topped off, or the engine could get ruined. I had to replace my windshield twice after a crack appeared in it. Both times it appeared after my car had been sitting in a parking lot, untouched. I took my car in for its regular 90,000 mile service, and it cost hundreds of dollars. When I picked it up from the shop, I found a parking spot near my apartment, parallel parked, put my wheel lock in place, locked my car, and walked away, hoping nothing would happen to it. The emotions I have for driving are completely opposite to my engagement with music, which is probably why I'm always driving with it. I've been playing guitar on and off for about 5 years. I would describe my current ability as intermediate trash, a Silver 2 guitar player maybe. I can follow along pretty well with a decent number of songs, but I would ultimately not be satisfied with the accuracy or the tone of the individual notes or my technique or even the timing of everything. To play a guitar beautifully, I would still probably need hundreds of hours of practice and pointed guidance. This is, in part, a personal thing for me. I have my own high standards of what it means to sound good, but I also know everybody has a different definition of what is or isn't beautiful. If I were to play one single beautiful note, I would need to know where exactly to press on the fret, how I would want to pluck it perfectly with a pick, and how I should hold it with my sustained finger. To play a melody, I would need to persist that focus for every upcoming note while applying the correct rhythm. Chords need different positions from different parts of different fingers on different strings at the same time to ring out perfectly. For a completely perfect and beautiful performance, I would need to know all of those mechanics without needing to think so much that it would distract me from the rest of the song. And that's without accounting for the additional layers of refinement that can come from different equipment, different effects, or differences in recording or production. After consuming all this racing media, I have begun to see the artistry that has been absent and possibly unattainable in my regular driving. Each element of the race could be an element of that part for the guitar. The notes and the melodies are the layout and the turns of the track. Strumming the notes is the acceleration, and the space between the notes is braking. Chords could be as complex and varied as turns, knowing the speed to match, where to enter, the curve's apex, and where to accelerate out. Kind of like knowing where on the neck to place your hands, which strings get which fingers, and where and how quickly you're going to strum. Both consecutive turns in a race and consecutive chords in a song rely on the positioning of the previous one to know how they should be tackled. Gran Turismo's license tests are kind of like the video tutorials in Rocksmith, or maybe more accurately, the drumming challenges that I found in Rock Band. Do this thing until you've perfected it. Mastery here will make it easier when you find it in the wild, but even then, just being able to reach gold or hit every note still doesn't really mean you're perfect. I already compared racing actual cars to performing in a band, but I think about bouncing into a car in order to make a turn the same way I see hiding behind another instrument to hide the fact that you messed up your part. And then there's the equipment. I recently bought a new pair of strings for my electric guitar after snapping one while playing Rocksmith. I went from a super slinky to a hybrid slinky, which means the upper 3 strings remain thin for easier bends and softer presses, while the lower strings are thicker and produce a heavier sound. After playing with the new strings for a month or two, I haven't really noticed a difference. Funnily enough, the new set of strings included a promo coupon for Rocksmith Plus, a game with a subscription service granting access to thousands of songs that I just have no interest in playing. I ended up letting the coupon expire, but if I were to continue this analogy, it would be like getting a demo of the latest Gran Turismo game after buying motor oil. But yeah, I couldn't tell the difference, and I think it's just because I don't have that much experience and don't really know what I should be thinking about with these different strings. I don't want to feel the same way about buying the right guitar as I did with buying the right car. If I were to sample a new guitar, would I be able to tell if it sounds good or even if it sounds different than what I currently have? If I could, would I be able to say why? I mean, I might in the future. It's only in playing these instruments that I start to identify the things I want to work on and get more insight into all of these smaller details. It also gives me a reason to try out different equipment so I can learn what I like and how to better articulate why. There's something to be said about how little I have to think about driving while driving versus when I was learning, and I imagine a similar transition occurs during the mastery of an instrument. The more I played these games, the easier they became. I started to know what I was doing, and I even started to understand what some of these different terms meant. Not all, but some. When I successfully complete a license test in Gran Turismo 4, the pit crew gathers around my car and applauds. I can talk about it flatly and make it sound really silly, but now that I'm aware of the precision and delicate balance of the car on the course to achieve these times, I can enjoy my achievement and agree that yeah, maybe I have accomplished something worthy of that applause. Maybe not for bronze, but absolutely for gold. I'll probably always hold a resentment for cars because of every night somebody loudly speeds down my street, or maybe because of the fear of damage to one I've spent so much on, or maybe every moment stuck in rush hour traffic, or maybe its effect on American city planning. But thanks to these virtual experiences, I'm now open to and interested in an entirely different world of driving. I'm more knowledgeable about its layers of complexity, and I can see just how easy it is to mess everything up. Even if it looks simple, or even if it looks like the same thing over and over again. Once I could consider the setup of the car and the buildup of momentum that leads into a complicated series of turns tackled so masterfully as to make it look effortless, I was able to... Once I could consider the setup of the car and the buildup of momentum that leads into a complicated series of turns tackled so masterfully as to make it look effortless, I was able to be emotionally engaged in something so mechanical. Their performances are fundamentally different from anything I will do in my day-to-day. Driving in a race is beyond my skill and interest, but yeah, I can see its beauty. There's a lot of art to be found in things that aren't explicitly used for the creation of art. I can find artistry in the packing of a suitcase, or bringing a large vehicle to a precise stop, or creating a single mixed drink. Japan has an entire tradition in brewing, pouring, and drinking tea in a way that conveys something. There is art from intent and communicating ideas or emotions indirectly. Vehicles on their own are not intrinsically artistic. In the hundreds of hours I've driven a car, there may only be seconds of any kind of artistry in there, and that's only if I really squint back into my memories. Driving was only ever a thing I learned to do mechanically and was never something to engage in artistically. When you drive with the mindset of getting it over with and not breaking anything, there's a little opportunity for any kind of expression. I have a car. I like my car. I don't love it, and I think I'll soon need to get my drive belts replaced due to a concerning squeal from the engine, but I like it. I enjoy not having to use my car for daily tasks. In a game, it's neat to pretend I'm racing an older version of my car, but I don't really care about other cars enough to want to drive them specifically, even if it's just for fun. Racing's neat. I like knowing about the things a person has to consider to push their car to its limits. I like the human element and drama of people competing in this sport that's all about intuition, understanding of car physics, varying levels of teamwork, and making a car work the best against those conditions. I like being able to relate and understand the people who are really interested in this sort of thing. I'm still pretty much a grade schooler on the scale of automobile knowledge. As a skilled driver, I might as well just be a child at a drum set banging away without any rhythm or pattern in mind. It feels like I'm just piercing the crust of knowing what all needs to happen for cars to move perfectly smooth and fast. I've been playing my guitar for years, but I know there's still a long way till I achieve my desired level of proficiency and competency. I think instead of splitting my focus, I'll continue on that journey while occasionally remembering this fond pit stop of vehicle interest. When I played Forza Horizon 4, cars in video games were just fun means of going fast and knocking into things. I'd engaged with them as I did with Hot Wheels as a young boy. After I saw the excitement of motorsport through the eyes of an enthusiast, Art of Rally was my gateway to experience that pure joy for myself. Gran Turismo 4 gave me an opportunity to dive further into the physics, setup, and mastering dozens of track variables. After who knows how many hours, with all there is to see and explore, I decided, this was fun, but I think I'm done for now. Cars and games are fun toys. Cars and races, simulated or not, require a wealth of ability and knowledge to control beautifully. These games and stories have opened my eyes to the many things I still don't know. The slight lack of focus or understanding can mess everything up, but driven right, they're incredible. The drives of daily lives require so much less. It sucks requiring a car to function, and nobody is tackling rush hour or stoplights with grace or artistry. Most people, myself included, will operate vehicles without any artistic intent. At least I can see that for entertainment, cars are pretty rad. I can see the beauty in it, but for now, I'll leave it to professionals and amateur enthusiasts to make art. I've got a guitar to master and dumb essays to write.